I don't know. His approval rating, as you know, was, I think, 22. So it's less than half of that of Donald Trump. He's been there for 9 years and is yet another global elite that's more focused on global elite issues than the issues that affect his own constituents and his own citizens. And so it's not, he and people like Gavin Newsom seem to be more worried about their hair than the people that they govern.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We are getting closer and closer to the date of Trump's inauguration, as well as the deadline for the Liberals' leadership race. Now, later today, all the premiers are supposed to be finally meeting with Trudeau to talk about what they're going to be doing with these tariffs if they do come into play. But two people have now backed out from the leadership race, Francois-Philippe Champagne, as well as Christy Clark. And here's a bit of coverage on that.
I will not be seeking to be the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada for the upcoming race.
Another cabinet minister rules himself out of the running to be the next Liberal Party leader. Industry Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne says at this time he needs to focus his energy on dealing with the U.S., which he says could be far rougher than anybody anticipates.
What we went through as a nation could look like a storm. What is coming up may look like a hurricane.
This as former BC Premier Christy Clark has now announced she's not running either. In a statement, Clark says there is simply not enough time to mount a successful campaign and for me to effectively connect with Francophone Canadians in their language. I've worked hard at improving my French, but it's not where it needs to be today.
Now, with these two bowing out of the race, especially Christy Clark, it's looking more and more like it'll be Mark Carney or Chrystia Freeland. Now, there's been reports saying that Mark Carney is going to announce his run for the leadership race on Thursday, tomorrow. And for Freeland, she hasn't really said much outside of she will do it before the inauguration of Trump, which is going to be next Monday. So maybe it'll be on the weekend. Who knows? But with these two dropping out, it seems like two more could potentially be on the list, which I wasn't even aware were on the chopping block. We have Jaime Batiste, which is the Indigenous MP for, I believe, Nova Scotia. He was on CBC earlier today talking with David Cochrane a little bit about his running or potential running. He hasn't officially agreed on it because of the money situation. And the other MP that's come forward is Karina Gould. Now, she hasn't officially stated anything. And when asked by the media earlier today, this was her answer.
Well, I'm seriously considering it. I'm thinking about it, and I'll have more to say in the coming days.
If you run for leadership, you would be the youngest candidate in the Liberal leadership race and the only one under 40. Would you consider this an advantage or a disadvantage?
Well, I will have more to say in the coming days, but I think it is extremely important that we have a younger voice in the race who can relate to people where they are and the struggles that they're facing today.
If you run, can we assume that you are ready to commit the next 6 to 8 years of your life, either as the Prime Minister or as the person rebuilding the Liberal Party, should it come to that this spring?
I think anyone who puts their name forward should be committing to that.
Now, I personally can't see Karina Gould winning. However, she is getting some backing from other Liberal members. As you're going to see from this panel with Vashi today, each one of these MPs is rooting for one of the candidates.
So where does the race go from here? And what do all these people deciding not to enter the race say about the party's electoral prospects? Let's bring in MPs who have decided who they are going to support. Francesco Sobera is a Liberal MP from Ontario. He'll support Mark Carney. Alexandra Mendez, a Liberal MP from Quebec, will support Chrystia Freeland. And Pam Damoff, a Liberal MP from Ontario, will support Karina Gould. Hello to all three of you. Thank you for making time for the conversation. I appreciate it. Mr. Sobera, I will start with you. And I actually wanted to pick up on something Christy Clark said in her announcement today. She said the timing of the Prime Minister's resignation just did not leave enough time for the party to build a process that will renew and grow our party. Doesn't she have a point?
Good evening, Vashi. To all due respect to ex-Premier Clark, the way I look at it, we are in a leadership race. We do have a path that candidates can present themselves. I welcome the candidates that have said that they will enter the race, and I look forward to hearing from other potential candidates. At the same time, those that contributed in various ways, either through Mr. Champagne or Mr. Joly or ex-Premier Clark. If they have decided not to enter the race for various reasons, I'll respect their opinion. But I disagree with ex-Premier Clark's opinion on that one.
Now, this was a bit of a lengthy session with Vashi and the MPs, but as you can clearly see, they all endorse a different candidate. But the main thing that I want to kind of focus on is when they talk about Mark Carney, because he was on Jon Stewart's the other night, everybody's seen it. But the main thing that they've been highlighting with that is that he keeps trying to put himself as an outsider, that he's not part of the government. And when Vashi poses this question to the Liberal MP who endorsed him, this was his answer.
I just have time for one quick question for each of you. So, Mr. Severa, I wanted to ask you about Mark Carney's declaration there on The Daily Show that he's an outsider. Why is he trying to sell himself as an outsider? Isn't being the party's economic advisor the ultimate insider role?
Well, he's been the economic advisor, I think, for 4 months to the Liberal Party of Canada. But when you look at his experience, his resume, he was appointed by the former Prime Minister Harper, who spoke very highly of him, and served as Bank of Canada governor, and served during the time of the financial crisis. And I worked in New York City and back in Toronto during the financial crisis. And Mark Carney was front and center in handling the financial crisis, which impacted the United States and Canada and across the world. We all remember 2008, 2000, and he was there. That experience and the experience of being the governor for the Bank of England, that pedigree. And we in Canada talk about successful Canadians. Mark Carney is someone who, has a family, grew up in Canada, went to university, did well for himself.
I'm not debating his success. It's just the idea that he's an outsider.
Well, look. The fact of the matter is that during the early years of our in tenure and power, Mark Carney was doing other things with his career. And he is an outsider. He's not sitting in cabinet right now. He's not an elected member of parliament. He is an outsider. He is someone who's coming to the table with a lot of experience, a lot of ambitions, and someone that I look to and say, facing the challenges that we face today, decarbonization, globalization, the shift in geopolitical politics, what's happening down in the States, right-wing populism, someone who understands the world, someone who understands what's happening here in Canada and where we need to take Canadians in Canada and meet Canadians where they're at. Canadians today are not where they were in 2015. Where they are today, I believe Mr. Carney understands it. I've had an extensive conversation with him, and I believe he is best positioned to take Canada forward and take the Liberal Party of Canada forward.
Now, that's clearly a bunch of BS. He's not an outsider. We all know that he's been working hand in hand with them. And even though he's only been on the task force for the past 4 months, he's been in close contact with Freeland, with Trudeau for a very, very long time. But the Conservatives quickly jumped on this, and this is the video that they put out.
Wild hypothetical. Let's say the candidate wasn't part of the government. Let's say the candidate did have a lot of economic experience. Let's say the candidate did deal with crises. Let's say the candidate had a plan to deal with the challenges in the here and now.
You sneaky, you're running as an outsider.
I am an outsider.
Wow, that's awesome. So
So clearly calling him out on all his BS. But later on, Vassy had another panel on where this was brought up. And just listen to the responses here.
Former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland and Government House Leader Karina Gould are expected to enter the race later this week. So where do these latest developments leave the Liberal leadership race? Let's take stock with our front bench, Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Now, Brian, you didn't announce this today. You announced last week. We are actually among someone who also is not running in this race, because there was some speculation that you might jump in. I have to ask you pretty bluntly, Christy Clark's assessment was basically the Prime Minister left it so that nobody has great options unless you've been organizing for the last year. That, in fact, is what I'm told she said to her core team on the call this morning. Is that your sense? They're dropping like flies now. Dominic LeBlanc, François-Philippe Champagne, Melanie Joly, yourself, Christy Clark. What does that say in the aggregate?
Well, a few things. So number one, I think it shows that this is going to be expedited, and it's completely normal for a bunch of people to kick the tires and then ultimately come to a conclusion that they're not going to run. Perhaps you actually end up having quite a few that run and they drop off as things progress, when maybe some type of deposit is due for paying to the party. So this is completely normal, but this is just very quick. So it feels, to Lisa's point, like it's been an eternity since last week, because every day there's somebody, if not 2 or 3 people, saying that they're not running for the leadership when they were speculated to be thinking about it, or frankly, they were actually organizing. So it feels a bit kind of weird because it's so quick, but this would be normal if it were expanded over a year, half a year, even 2 years at times, when some parties have that sort of runway. The second thing that I think it says, we sort of have the quarterfinals, the tennis analogy here, but the quarterfinals, the semis, before the finals. And that's normal as well. And it kind of goes to what I was discussing. But I think what's being set up is clearly a race that the party's going to have to decide. Do they want somebody that has been a part of the Trudeau government, that obviously has a skill set, that obviously has the capability to govern? They've been doing it for a while. They obviously know a lot of Liberals and have been sort of fighting the good fight, if you will. Or do you want an outsider? So it just feels like they've already decided, or it feels like it's starting to coalesce which outsider is going to remain standing in the finals. And I think we're probably going to start to see a candidate or two in the sort of other camp that they have been a part of the Trudeau government, and that will be the decision point essentially for the party.
Lisa, I love your facial expression as Brian was describing Mark Carney as an outsider. Conservatives would not classify Mr. Carney as an outsider at all, is my guess, right, Lisa?
Listen, let me just say that he's as much an outsider as I am an outsider. This guy's been the Trudeau whisperer since 2020. And before that, he's been in his ear on COVID. He was part of Building Back Better. He chairs an economic task force. I think they wanted to replace both Morneau and Chrystia Freeland with them. As we'd say in Cape Breton, butter wouldn't melt in this guy's mouth. He is not an outsider. It's a valiant effort to claim that he is one in order to paint a different narrative. But the proof is in the pudding. And don't equate just the fact that you don't have a high public profile to the ordinary Canadian voter as being an outsider, because people are going to see right through that.
No, I think Brian is a nice guy. He's probably somebody you could have a drink with, good conversationalist. But you could see the liberal delusion that's building in his head. Because, as Lisa pointed out, Mark Carney has been a whisperer in Trudeau's ear for a very long time. If you know anything about him, he's pro-WEF policies, and he's very much a globalist. He's worked with Klaus Schwab. He has all these ties in these shady businesses that are not things that people want in their life. And so to call him an outsider is a little ridiculous. But when we move to Tom Mulcair, he actually has a different view and says that because of his freshness, and that because he's not Justin Trudeau, a lot of the votes that were going to be going to Pierre Poilievre might actually shift over to Mark Carney. Take a listen.
He is going to, I think it's clear based on that interview last night, Tom, that will be part of his pitch, right? To Liberal voters. I am not what the other ones are, like Chrystia Freeland or Karina Gold. I have not been on the inside of this government that you do not like. Do you think, A, that message will resonate with Liberal voters? And B, like beyond that, the next step is obviously that 2-day campaign or whatever he's going to have to the general electorate.
I think that to your first point, that there are going to be a heck of a lot of Liberal voters who will see him as something fresh, something different from what they've been used to with the Trudeau era. It's always been the same gang tightly controlling the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office. That's the type of thing that Canadians found stifling. And I do think that Carney last night showed a side of him that I've known for some time. Everybody was always saying, he's going to be like Ignatieff, he can't talk to people and so forth. And people saw somebody who was able to riff for the better part of 20 minutes with Jon Stewart and come off quite well. With regard to the wider public, it's going to be very interesting to keep an eye on two things. One is the polling numbers, because my theory, and a lot of people in the polling industry tend to agree, that a lot of the votes that were said to be going to Poilievre and the Conservatives were people who were just fed up with Trudeau. They just didn't want to see the guy anymore. And the pious scolding, to quote Steve Marr's great line. So I think that there is a fair bit of that fresh air that freshness that Carney represents, deep experience, tons of expertise, and the ability to talk with people, as we saw. He's going to be launching in a town where he went to high school, in Edmonton. Word is he might even be running there. It's going to be worth watching. I think that the overall Canadian public is going to give him a chance. And I got some very interesting information from one very large cultural community, ethnic cultural community over the weekend, that had been drifting over to Poilievre and the Conservatives, looking to see which way things were going to go. And a lot of them are now heading back to the Liberals because they think Carney's going to win it.
Now, to Tom's point, I could see that being the case if that was true, that people only are voting for Pierre because they simply hate Justin. But it's not because they don't like him. It's also his policies that him and his government have been implementing over the past 9 years, the actions that his government has taken. That is the main reason they want him out. Life has been a lot worse under the Liberals. It's not simply because they don't like Justin Trudeau. And if we were to look at the map, this would be a lot of work to try to switch this all now back to red. Like, there are some spots here, which you can see behind my camera. These are going to be red, but you actually have to zoom in quite a bit to get to actual like little Liberal spots. And this is mainly like the downtown Toronto core, some places in Ottawa, a little bit of Montreal. There might be one in Winnipeg I saw. Yeah, like this one little spot here in Winnipeg. Like the rest of these places, they don't want Liberals. And I don't think it's simply because Trudeau is the leader of the Liberal Party. It's because of the policies that the Liberals have implemented. Now, when Vashi moves on and she starts talking about the numbers and where people stand, the next guest, Rob, he starts kind of comparing what Mark Carney did on the Jon Stewart show with Pierre Poilievre's interview with Jordan Peterson. Take a listen.
Let me put some numbers to what we're talking about, Rob, and then get you to jump in. So Leger just polled over the past few days Liberal supporters and then the wider electorate. Among Liberal supporters, 21% were supportive of Freeland, 27% of Mark Carney. It went down steeply from there. Christy Clark, 6%, Champagne at 4%, someone else at 5%, and I don't know at 30%. Among all respondents, Chrystia Freeland actually had a 1% edge, which is obviously within the margin of error over Mark Carney. Mark Carney at just 13%, Freeland at 14%, and then it dips again. Someone else at 14% as well, and I don't know at a staggering 46%. What does that tell you at this juncture?
Well, I mean, polls are very tricky when you're dealing with leadership, especially because it is who shows up to vote. I mean, how many are going to turn out? Who sells the memberships? Who can rally the support? I mean, it does feel to me, watching it from Toronto, that it is very much between Chrystia Freeland, who's a Toronto MP, and Mark Carney, who is a well-known figure on Bay Street, let's just say. I don't disagree with Lisa. It's a bit of a stretch to call him an outsider, but Tom is right that he did well last night on Jon Stewart. There were some softball questions, some oddball questions, and I thought he rolled with the punches much better than I thought he would. He's never particularly impressed me, his speaking at speeches and his encounters with reporters. They've never blown my mind as, the second coming of Barack Obama or something. But I thought he showed a comfort level. And if you contrast his discussion with Jon Stewart and, say, Pierre Poilievre's discussion with Jordan Peterson, granted that the one with Peterson was a 2-hour podcast. It's a marathon. And this last night was just 20 minutes. It's an interesting kind of take. I thought it was also not odd. It was telling how the Tories are already saying, look, he didn't come back for you. They're saying they're sending out videos of him calling himself a European at the World Economic Forum, which is, that's red meat for their base. But he was throwing shade on Poilievre last night, basically calling him a career politician who's never worked in the markets and never had a real job. That's a sore point, because it's actually true. Poilievre hasn't had any real world experience. Now, Carney's experience is not the same as most people's. I mean, when was the last time he went to a grocery store? It might have been Fortnum and Mason in Piccadilly in London. I mean, he doesn't really exude the common touch, even though I know he's originally an Albertan.
Now, I really don't understand the rhetoric behind Pierre Poilievre being a career politician and that he's not able to somehow connect to the people. He's been doing a pretty good job, in my opinion, But what relevance does that have? You have so many people in the Liberal Party who are in roles that they should not be in. They have no experience in those roles. Like the finance minister, Chrystia Freeland. She's a journalist. Why is she in the finance sector? You have Karina Gould, who's an actual immigration lawyer, who's not in the immigration role. Mark Miller is. So you have plenty of people who are in roles that they quote unquote shouldn't be in because that's all they've done. Like, to bring up the fact that Pierre has only been in politics when we're talking about politics should be a strength, not a flaw. So I don't understand what he's trying to get at with that. But as Vashti starts to close off the show, she's asking again about the optics about Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, their ties to the Liberals and the party and how it stands and how the outcome's going to look for them. And this is what the panel had to say.
I wonder, Brian, I had a number of calls today from Liberal MPs who were supportive of Carney, but worried about the appearance of a coronation. Do you think that would send a bad signal?
Well, I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, it's certainly, to Rob's point, I think there's going to be at least one other candidate go through right to the process, if not a few more. So I don't think that'll happen. And look, I just want to be clear too. I agree with Lisa's points to some extent. I think it's fair to say Carney's an outsider of the Trudeau government, but I think it's completely fair to say, and frankly, the Conservatives have done a good job of starting quite early on doing this, that he was connected to the government. I think that's fair, and there's certainly a lot of proof points. So I think those two things are true at the same time. So whether that's an outsider enough for the party to win the leadership, we'll see, and whether it's a message that will resonate with Canadians if he ends up winning, we'll see. If that's the case. What's interesting for Freeland is she would be, Deputy Prime Minister for 9 years or several years, Minister of Finance, high-profile minister. You would think that would be the standard bearer of the sort of Trudeau government. But then obviously we know what happened a week ago, so it's kind of like it's a very weird dynamic. You have one that was sort of an outsider, but kind of hugged the government a bit over the last few months, and then you had one that was completely a part of the government and kind of distanced themselves right at the last minute. So interesting dynamic, to say the least.
Yeah, in Freeland's case, Lisa, I was just talking to one of the MPs on air, Alexander Menace, who's supporting her, and asking, to what degree does she have to distance herself from Trudeau beyond even, what happened on December 16th? And her argument was she doesn't. And I wonder what you thought of that.
Yeah, I don't think she can. But equally, you pointed out at the top of the segment that, quite frankly, Mr. Carney has a problem with the carbon tax. He wrote about it glowingly in his book. And what he said last night wasn't that there was not going to be a carbon tax. He said that there's not going to be a carbon tax right now. So he's not abandoning it. And of course, the Conservatives have a very strong position that you'll never have to pay the carbon tax, whereas Mr. Carney seems to be saying, well, right now may not be the best time for you to do it, but, maybe in the future. And if the election is about a carbon tax, he's going to have a hard place to go from there. And I don't quite know where the rest of the Liberals are going to go on it. Certainly, Chrystia has the ability to say that she broke rank with the Prime Minister at the end and she was contrary to what he has to say. And she may not be the most favored nation in this competition right now. So she can come at it from that point of view. But she's going to wear the entire last 12 years that she's been there.
And what Lisa said is completely true, because the Conservatives are definitely going to hammer in the fact that she's been hand in hand working with Trudeau for the past 9-10 years. And especially after the trucker convoy, when bank accounts got frozen and all these little policies and the financial budgets that have never been met, people look at Freeland and they despise her as much as they do Trudeau. They make fun of her constantly, the Mr. Speaker, that thing is completely irritating. But it will be interesting to see what happens in the next few days if she actually does announce it as the weekend gets closer and closer. But as always, I'd love to hear from you guys. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about all this. I'm sure you could all tell my voice, I'm losing it. My wife was sick with, I'm pretty sure, pneumonia, gave it to the kids. Kids got a little bit, I got a little bit of sickness. So hopefully I can still get a voice to make a video later on. But if not, it might be a few days. But as always, I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.